Telling Will about the anomaly in the basement of my childhood home was not my mistake. No, my mistake was letting him see it. The return to my hometown was already emotional for many reasons. That day, I went alone. That day, I let myself in with my key and sat for half an hour in the kitchen, remembering all the mornings I'd spent eating cereal at that table and trying to weasel my way out of going to school. I didn't have to go to school anymore, but somehow I wished I was back in those moments for just a little while. After that, I went out to the hauling truck and retrieved a stack of cardboard. Down in the basement, I made a guess as to how much stuff I had to pack up, and I began folding the cardboard into fresh boxes. 4 boxes in, I caught sight of a smooth, shallow depression in the grey cinder block wall. A rush of memories followed. When we were younger, my brother Will and I had played down in this basement at times, and one of our favourite imaginings was that we could make small toys disappear by sliding them into a specific inch-wide point in the air. I couldn't remember how we'd found it, and I hadn't thought about it in years, but now I was staring at a 4-foot absence. The boxes below had begun to lose their flaps and the protruding edges of their contents in a sphere of emptiness, and the wall itself looked like someone had carved out a perfect curve. Heart racing, I held one of my fresh boxes ahead of me and moved it closer until I saw the end begin to vanish. Pulling the box back, I dropped it on the ground and flipped it around. The portions that disappeared had not come back. The cardboard was gone, and the edges left behind were eerily smooth. For several minutes, I paced the basement, trying to process what I'd found. How was it real? How had this old game become a real thing? Or had it always been there, and we just interpreted it through the lens of childhood? Like it or not, I had to face the fact that there was an inexplicable sphere of disintegration in my basement. While trying to figure out what to do, I pulled away the boxes underneath and marked the floor with tape to avoid accidentally coming into contact with it. I could see how no one had noticed it all these years. It was in the back corner, above boxes filled with old junk. But this was strange enough that I had to tell someone, right? The first call I made was to Will. At first, he didn't believe me. I argued with him on the phone and even sent him pictures of what had happened to the wall. But he dismissed them as being doctored. He thought I was trying to trick him, and so I was forced to actually lie. I told him I was just having a breakdown about our parents, and I needed him to come there right away. I waited for him by the hauling truck, and when he saw that I was fine, he grimaced. "Is this about that basement prank?" "Just come see it," I told him, practically dragging him inside and downstairs. Then, I gave him an old piece of wood. "Here, hold it towards the taped-off area." Will sighed in that manner that only older brothers could. "Fine, I'll..." The end of his piece of wood began to disappear. "Christ!" "See?" I shouted, moving out of his way as he stumbled back. "That game we used to play with the toys. It was this. It was real." He shook his head, his gaze locked on the empty air ahead. "No, this is something else. It has to be. This is so much worse than I remember. It was nothing at the time, a small thing. It was a big deal then too, I insisted. We just didn't know any better. I turned and pulled out my phone. I'm going to get some help with this. He finally snapped out of his daze, but only to forcefully grab me by the front of my shirt. With fierce eyes, he demanded, "Don't you tell anybody." I pushed him off with a leg-supported heave. "I have to. This isn't normal." He backed off for a time, his attention turning towards the unseen sphere. While I talked to a college friend in physics I'd graduated with last year, Will began testing different objects. Metal, porcelain, wood, even a glass of water. It all disappeared above the line of tape. While Will was carefully disintegrating the end of a tall lamp, the stairs creaked, and we both turned to see our neighbours on the stairs. It was too late. Mr. and Mrs. Evans were already watching us in shock. "I thought I heard shouting," Mr. Evans said, confused by what he'd seen. Mrs. Evans came down the stairs, still stunned but concerned. She touched me on the shoulder and asked kindly, "Are you all right down here?" Her gaze turned with suspicion towards Will and the unseen sphere. "I'm fine," I told her. It wasn't the first time they'd come over like this, and I just wanted them to leave. "We're packing things up." "Come on, honey," Mr. Evans said, waving her away. "They're fine." He glowered one last time at Will and the strange sight they'd beheld, and then helped his wife up the stairs. They left just in time to miss the arrival of my physics friend, Ishmael. He rushed up the driveway from his car, surrounded by a cloud of bulky equipment. I tried to help, but he just shook his head and asked to be led to the basement. "Is it real?" "See for yourself," I told him, helping him set up his stuff between the boxes. His gear included a camera on a tripod, several pieces of testing equipment, and some radiation detectors. At these, I paused. "You think this thing might be giving off radiation?" Ishmael grimaced. "With the behaviour you described, probably. I definitely wouldn't want to live above this thing. If it's giving off anything dangerous, there'd be a pretty big cancer risk." Will and I shared an unhappy glance. "All right," Ishmael said, as he hung some opaque sheets of heavy material from the unfinished ceiling. "We'll stand behind these in case there's acute radiation." We nodded, took our spot, and I held out the first long piece of wood. Ishmael's camera captured every moment of the wood's slow disappearance, while he stared wide-eyed and cursed softly. Cycling quickly through his devices, he checked each one and then declared, "Well, no radiation." "That's a relief," Will sighed. "No," Ishmael countered. "It's super weird. I sort of expected that the matter in the objects was being torn apart and scattered, but that's not what's happening. Here's the real question. Why isn't there a tornado in here?" I looked at the empty sphere for a moment, before realising what he meant. "You mean, why isn't it destroying the air too?" He nodded. "This isn't a portal to somewhere else, and it's not disintegrating matter outright. I wonder what it is doing." While he continued to perform tests, Will pulled me aside. "Look, I understand the need for help on this, but we really can't tell anyone else. This is a family matter." I nearly bit my tongue. but then decided to stand up for myself for once. "Why do you want me to keep it a secret?" It was then he went a totally different direction than I was expecting. His eyes lit up, and he traced a hand across an imaginary display of the future. "Think about it. We could run a waste disposal company like no other. Destroy anything instantly and permanently. You know all that nuclear waste they bury in the desert? Gone. Toxic factory waste? Gone. We could ship it all here from anywhere and just annihilate it. No one else would ever be able to match us." "Oh, so it's about money, is it?" I asked, angry for some reason. "You think the government will just let us keep this to ourselves?" "Of course not," he said with a small laugh. "That's why we'll keep it a secret. They won't know about it, and we'll get rich. If anyone does suspect, we'll just say they're crazy and call them conspiracy theorists. Think about it. Who would believe the truth?" That path seemed dangerous and self-serving. "We have to tell someone." He gripped me hard by each arm. As I struggled to get away from him, he insisted, "No, there's too much money at stake." Turning away from his work, Ishmael asked, "Everything okay?" Will let go, and I nodded. "I'm fine. What are you finding?" "I think this sphere is turning solid and liquid matter into harmless gases," he reported, peering at some of his instruments. "A little bit of argon, a little bit of nitrogen, but mostly carbon dioxide. I recommend you keep the windows open at all times to air it out." Pushing away from my older brother, I helped open the windows, and then we stood regarding the anomaly. "So it's harmless?" Will asked. "Doesn't give us cancer or anything?" Ishmael shook his head. "Looks to be a growing bubble of alternate physical laws, or at least that's my best guess. I don't know what's causing it, but if it's getting bigger over the years, then that's a huge problem. It's gravitationally bound, as we can tell from it staying in the same place rather than floating through space, so it's going to stay here on the Earth. We should probably begin working on a way to undo it, because in a few centuries, it might get big enough to destroy all life on the planet. It doesn't even need to directly convert everything. If it produces enough carbon dioxide, we'll all..." Without warning, Will pushed him forward, and Ishmael fell. Only his bottom half hit the floor, and his wet intestines began spilling out from his open pelvis, vanishing. Choking from the sudden breeze and the knowledge I was breathing in his disintegrated flesh, I ran. Will caught me upstairs in the kitchen and covered my mouth to keep me from screaming. "Stop," he hissed. "Stop. It had to be done. Now we're the only ones that know." I had no choice but to let him think I was calming down. He slowly let go. "Now, are we going to get rich, or are you going to be a problem? You know I'd never hurt you, but..." I spit in his face. He backed down and wiped his cheek clean. "I'm sorry, I really am." He sighed and headed for the basement stairs. "I'm going to push the rest of his body and all of his gear into the sphere. There won't be any trace left. No body, no murder charge. And if you tell anyone, I'll say you were complicit. Just so you know. Sorry, but I'm just protecting myself." Full of anger, humiliation and hate, I dashed from the house as soon as he moved out of sight. Running next door, I knocked until Mr. and Mrs. Evans opened up. And then I began frantically showing them the pictures and explaining what we'd found. It's eventually going to destroy the world if we don't do something about it. They nodded and listened. They'd seen it. They believed me. Mrs. Evans saw the bruises on my arms and frowned. "Honey, we'll help you. Just get somewhere safe and we'll call the police." I couldn't thank them enough. I just needed to know I had allies, that I wasn't alone. Retreating to my rented truck, I drove halfway down the block, locked the doors, and sat watching my childhood home while I tried to figure out what to do next. My first move was to post all of the pictures and information I gathered online in as many forums and message boards as I could. It didn't matter what Will tried to do. Others would know. About 20 minutes into that task, I saw Mr. Evans open his door and cross his lawn to post a handwritten "for sale" sign. I got out of my truck and headed over to question him about it. But while walking over, a police cruiser finally arrived. The cop got out and intercepted me, asking me immediately if I was all right, and I began to try to explain. He was skeptical, but I showed him the photos on my phone, and he glared over at my house. Waving Mr. Evans closer, I asked him, "Here, tell him about the sphere. You saw it." Mr. Evans gave me an apologetic look and then turned to the cop. "This isn't the first time we've heard yelling in that house. But as for this disintegration thingy, no, there's nothing down there. Me and the missus saw an empty basement with our own eyes when we went to check. Nothing down there." Horrified, I demanded, "What the hell?" Until I realised why he'd posted a "for sale" sign. They wanted to sell their house before the truth was exposed. The value would drop if people knew it was next to a strange disintegrating anomaly that would eventually expand and destroy it. Just like Will, Mr. Evans was more concerned about money than the truth. Over the course of the next 20 minutes, the cop got Will outside. But my older brother and Mr. Evans managed to make me look like a crazy person. At the end of the back and forth, the cop looked me over and said tiredly, "Look, I could have helped you if not for that crazy story, but I'm not going to touch this one with a 10-foot pole. Just get somewhere safe and call up family if you can. I'm not dealing with a he said, she said situation. You look uninjured, just leave the premises." Frustrated beyond belief, I watched the cop get back in his cruiser and pull away. Beside me, Mr. Evans murmured an apology and headed back to his house. Will sneered at me and returned back to the house. At least I had the internet. Others would listen. I got back on my phone and began checking what I'd posted. To my horror, there were already a bevy of eerily similar response posts from various blogs, decrying the latest conspiracy and claiming that these disintegration spheres were fake news. Dozens of comments were pouring in on every site about how I was a liar, that all my images had been doctored, and that I was being funded by liberal billionaires to spread conspiracies. The reaction was so over the top and so consistent, I got the sense it wasn't natural. Were there other spheres like the one in my basement? Were other people trying to get the word out, but being silenced? How could anyone spread propaganda to cover up something that might destroy the world? Oh, money, obviously. We'd known about the sphere for less than a few hours, and it had already made nice people lie and bad people kill. I sat down on the curb, forlorn. I was alone in this. What could I do? I could try to fight Will, but he was bigger and stronger, and likely expecting such an attack. I couldn't beat him. He'd overpower me. I could try to tell more people, but the way others had reacted so far told me that no one would really know what to do about it. To get past the barrier of propaganda and reach a wider audience, I'd need tons of money. I needed money to fight money. It was a self-defeating circle of logic. The only strategy that made sense was to wait until the problem got dramatically worse and could no longer be denied. I had to hope that it wouldn't be too late by then. Once the sphere was the size of a city block, or even a city itself. Once the sphere was so huge that no one could deny it as a threat. Would it still be possible to find a solution? I needed money. Heading back into the house and down to the basement, I watched Will applying some more tape. It got bigger after Ishmael fell in, he said, nursing a bleeding finger where he'd grazed the edge. So we'll have to keep measuring it after we use it. Makes sense, I told him. So, how do we start this business? He grinned, came up, and gripped me amicably by the back of the neck. I knew you'd come around. I just gave a hesitant smile and nodded. It was all I could do, for now.